welcome everyone. I think everybody knows one another, so this is our annual presentation of our state assessment results. So these will capture the results of assessments that students took on state assessments last spring. And I'll just ruin the surprise by saying that, of course, last spring was our first year with the Smarter Balanced Assessment, so we have now got a new baseline. So we'll be kind of presenting results and how we compare with state and such, but we won't necessarily have trend results to look at because we've reset the bar this year. So now that I've stolen all of Brandon's thunder.
That was the surprise.
I think he should get credit for the new template.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And if folks don't mind, do you want, can I dim the lights just a little bit?
Yeah, I
so
was
the
trying
screen's
to
a little easier to
to
read.
figure out the lights in this room at all.
Or whatever we do for this one.
Oh, it happens in the other room too, doesn't it? Yeah.
Or it doesn't happen at all.
Yeah, the only way I could find was either roll on or roll off.
It is gradually.
That
Here
under.
it goes.
Did that do a little bit? Okay.
Yes,
Yes,
yes, yes, that's great.
So I've got a lot of compliments on the tip, but what you don't know is that these aren't raindrops, these are tears of joy. We made it through the first implementation of Smarter Balanced Assessments, and almost kept all my sanity the entire year as well, almost. Particularly at the high schools, we're in a process of phasing out the old systems while we're implementing the new. And so, as Larry said, last spring was the first administration of the operational Smarter Balanced Assessments. There are opportunities to do field testing the year prior, which we did not participate in, and then pilot testing a couple of years back, which we did participate in. But we still have the measurements of student progress in grades 5 and 8 for science. And at the high schools, if you're a senior, you still have the high school proficiency exams in reading and writing available to meet the graduation requirements, in addition to end-of-course exams in math, which are being phased out over the next 3 years. We still also currently have the end-of-course exam in biology, which will eventually be replaced by a next-generation science standards assessment. It's still somewhat unclear when that will occur. The last date I heard was spring 2017. That seems to be a constantly moving target. So what I wanted to start with is talk about how the data we're receiving back from Smarter Balanced is different from what we've been used to for the MSP and before that the WASL. And so this is just a picture representation of what the old scale was like. On the MSP, in all content areas and all grade levels, with writing being the exception, 400 was the magic number to be deemed passing on the test. And as you can see, level 1 always ended at 375. Level 2 was always 376 to 399. Again, magic number was always 400. Level 3 and level 4 were the two levels in the scale that were allowed to vary a little bit from year to year. You can see that the variation in level 3 is hardly discernible over time, although it does make a little broader of a jump as we approach high school. Level 4 had the most flexibility over time. You can see it was actually 500 in 3rd grade, and then took a dip for grades 4 through 7 before it started to increase again for 8th grade in high school. So these are what the Smarter Balanced scale scores look like. As you can see, they all slope upwards across grade levels, and there's a different scale for ELA as there is for math. And so this is what they mean by a vertical scale. The scale score you need over time keeps on moving up. So it's an upward target that student is trying to achieve each and every year. And so because of that, over time, we'll be able to more directly measure growth of a student over time as well. In the MSP days, if a kid got 400 one year and 410 the next, we couldn't say that they had 10 points of improvement because remember that level 3 and level 4 were flexible. They're allowed to go up and down over time. On this one, we're consistently moving up over time, so if a kid scores 10 points higher, that does more directly mean that they did 10 points better than the previous year.
Oh, why do they have the same scaled score? That, you know, like 28 and 28, why do they, do you know why?
Do you mean on the MSP, is that what you're referring to?
Between math and ELA.
Yeah. So one's 2,800 is the highest you can get, the other one's 29, like, why wouldn't, you know how like on a SAT subject test, they're all out of 800, right?
Mhm.
That's a max points you can get, like,
Yeah, to be honest with you, I'm not 100% sure. One of the interesting things about scale
it's
scores
like, why would you do
is
that?
that the actual scale you use is practically arbitrary.
Yeah.
You know, this could be 10,000 through 20,000 if they wanted it to be. And anything that I said about why they had a different endpoint and beginning point for that matter on the ELA mass scale, I'd be guessing. So I'll avoid that, just saying I'll look into it and try to figure out why. All right, so these next couple of graphs show what the North Shore and the state average scale scores were on the Smarter Balanced Assessments for ELA and for math and by grade level. And so they match, especially for ELA, what the expectation would be, since the scale score is progressively moving up over time as far as what target the student needs to be deemed passing on that assessment. You would expect, if at least not hope for, that you would have that trajectory within your student population over time. And you can see that our trend across the grade levels, because we don't have a time trend yet, is pretty consistent with the state, with the English language arts assessment. And as we've seen with things like the HISP and the WASL before that, we have a jump in scores in the high school, so the trajectory starts to move upward at a more rapid pace, and that's likely due to the fact that 10th graders were allowed to take the assessment last spring to meet their ELA state assessment graduation requirement. That wasn't the case for math, and you can see at the state level, there was actually a dip in scale score from 8th grade to high school. North Shore still had an increase in scale score in math from 8th grade to high school. And it's hard to say why we had a different pattern from the state, because we had a fairly large refusal rate, which was mirrored across many areas in the state. And so while this is something that I haven't looked into great detail yet, one potential possibility is that many of the students who did test were students that were above average achievers, and so they were able to bump up that scale score, which wasn't able to be mirrored across the state.
Why is high school lumped together?
This is
I have it
10th grade.
broken out on later slides.
I don't see ninth graders not together.
Ninth
No,
graders.
that doesn't take state
And 11?
assessments. Yeah, so the ELA is 10th and 11th. On later slides, I do have that broken out. And high school is just 11th because 10th graders were not allowed to take the math.
So ninth graders
grades.
will never take this?
No. No, ninth graders are traditionally not a state assessment grade level. The only reason why they started to take state assessments was because of the math end of course exams. And most students take algebra by the end of their ninth grade year. Otherwise, they still wouldn't be taking any state assessments.
So there's no state assessments in ninth grade?
Nope.
Wow.
And now, since the end of course exams are being phased out, ninth graders are again not taking those as well. So this year again, ninth graders will get a 1-year break from state assessments. All right, and then this is just to show you how the average scale scores look different in the MSP days. I actually ran this on 2014 data for our students, and every single grade level in that year had an average scale score of exactly 423.
Really?
So
That's weird.
that's another reason why you can't judge growth over time on the MSP. All right, so of course, last year, OSPI came out with the field test outcomes of how the percentage of students who met standard, and so that created lots of anxiety that scores would dip by 20%, 30%, if not more. And so this is just taking a look at how things panned out compared to that field test. So this top blue line here is how North Shore did on the MSP in 2014, last year that we administered that. This is just using math as an example because math is the most directly related to Smarter Balanced, because the reading MSP is now the English Language Arts Smarter Balanced, which incorporates reading and writing, research, inquiry, all kinds of other areas. This bottom line is how the state did on the MSP in 2014. Then we had the field test results, which again had a lot of Washington State schools, and so there's a lot of Washington State influence on how those results came out. As you can see, it's just under 40%.
What is the variance there?
What is that?
What's the variance between how the state did, how we did, those two compared to the field test? Why is such a,
Well, this is just the MSP so far.
There was nothing at stake for the field test, right?
Yeah, there wasn't anything at
MSP
stake
right
for
now,
the
not
field
Smarter
test.
Balanced?
Correct, he hasn't put Smarter Balance up yet.
The
Field test is smart balance.
Right,
Yeah, field test is Smart
That's
Balance.
what the other
There's
version
still going to be, I know, a big difference. I think.
And so now we have how
That's up.
North Shore did on Smart Balance. Again, this is percent meeting standard, and so that's why now we see a dip in high school on those math tests, because it's percent meeting standard, not average scale score anymore.
So Brandon, could I just go back for 1 minute? So
Yep.
just to make sure everybody's clear, the field test was testing the Smarter Balance
Yeah.
assessment. right?
Yeah.
So
Right.
still, what is that variance between North Shore Smarter Balance? I
That's not
realize it
Smarter
wasn't all North
Balance.
Shore students.
we just
Well,
put it
that
up,
one is.
the orange one is.
Yeah.
Right.
But there's nothing at stake with the fields test. I mean, it's-
Yeah, there was nothing at stake with the field test. It wasn't
Not a
necessarily a random sample, because it was people choosing to participate in that test. It wasn't necessarily finalized items. There were certainly items in the
Yeah.
field test that got thrown out for the operational
Right.
test. There's a lot of variables, but with that said, I was just as pleasantly surprised as everyone else that our Smarter Balance results were so much higher above that field test than what was feared. And as you can see, in third grade, Smarter Balance math was almost equal to how they did on MSP math in 2014. Broke apart a little bit in other grade levels, especially in, looks like that's grade 6 math. But again, 1 year of data, so we really even paying too much attention to that yet.
And this is percentage of kids that got a 3 or a 4,
Yep,
correct?
yep. But then the state line,
Oh my.
as you can see, they're also above the field test. One of the interesting things here is that the gap between North Shore and state from MSP to Smarter Balance actually seemed to increase, where North Shore outperformed the state on Smarter Balance to a greater degree than what they did, again, on 1 year of MSP data from 2014. And there was some predictions, meaning I was predicting, that maybe North Shore would actually come closer to the state bar that first year, since we didn't have any participation in the field test. Maybe the districts who did, like Edmonds, for example, was practically all in on field testing in 2015. So then maybe that would give a temporary advantage statewide that hadn't been seen on the MSP, and also the opposite came true, at least for the first year data. And also another prediction that I was making is that we would have a bigger drop than this simply because of a test effect of students not being used to things like classroom activities and adaptive testing and performance tests.
Computer testing.
Computer testing for young grade levels, every grade level having to write an essay to one extent or another. But again, we don't really see that panning out much in this 1 year's worth of data. All right, and here it is for reading. Bring up the lines a little quicker. So this is a 2014 MSP, State North Shore, what the field test for Smarter Balanced gave us, and then how we actually did on Smarter Balanced. And so a similar trend as the state. And again, the bars seem to be further away from each other in Smarter Balance than they were in MSP, showing that North Shore, at least for the first initial year, outperformed the state to a greater extent than what we had with the MSP.
So in the ELA Smarter Balance, sophomores and juniors took it?
Yes.
So, and was that just because it was the first year? I thought it was supposed to be juniors only?
Yeah, it was initially supposed to be juniors only, and I forget exactly when they gave final approval for 10th grade. They implemented that so that they could phase out the HISP at a fairly rapid rate and still allow opportunities for the high school graduation environment.
So will those sophomores, if they passed, will they not take it again as a junior?
That's
Kind
That's
of.
the million-dollar question.
Oh.
And the reason why that is a tougher question than it should be is because there's the graduation bar and then the career and college
Oh,
ready
that's
bar.
true.
And so if a student did not meet the career and college ready bar, a district or a school or a student might want to still test to meet the federal accountability and so that they don't have to have any more placement testing for college courses.
I thought I remember reading that if they met the career and college ready in 10th grade, they were then done. They did not.
Yes, if they meet
That's
career and college
longer.
ready.
That's
Right, so it's
Yeah.
that
But that's
graduation.
different than if they pass.
That's
Yeah.
different than
Right.
high school.
Yeah, we have a subset of students that passed because they met the graduation
Right,
bar, but
right.
not the career and
But
college ready.
right.
And so just so I'm clear, this is the pass rate, not the career and college rate?
This is career and college ready.
That is career and college rate?
Yeah.
Okay.
So in 6th grade, it's at about 80% approximately, we can't tell exactly. And I know probably high school, it went down to approximately 70% because a lot of the dropout rate, dropping out, maybe not taking the test in the 11th grade. But it's kind of downward trending from 6th grade towards high school on ours. So, and I don't know if that's significant or not, but it looks like it might be 10 points, so it might be significant.
And just to clarify about this high school data point, this does not include refusals. This is just students who tested and how they did.
But still, it might be skewed.
Oh yeah, because there's certainly still probably juniors in there who tested, but maybe didn't have the same motivation they would have if they're doing it to graduate.
So any ideas though why it might have, like, do you know if that's like significant or not between 6th, 7th, and 8th grade?
Well, the one thing that I can say is that this increase from 7 to 8 on MSP usually doesn't happen on most MSP years. We see a dip in grades 7 and 8, then a sudden jump in 10. And so this dip in 7 and 8 wasn't as surprising to me because we've seen that quite often with the historical MSP data. And one of the folks from OSPI that do all the behind-the-scenes analysis of the MSP have made statements to suggest that the 7th and 8th grade MSPs were simply a harder test. That benchmark to achieve was harder. My suspicion was always that 7th and 8th graders are simply a tougher group to pin down and to assess. And so
That's a nice one.
that's what I'm thinking we're seeing possibly again in the Smarter Balance data. But I don't know if other folks have anything to add to that or not.
It's,
just one
it's difficult
Yeah.
since it's
Yeah.
just baseline, right? I mean, it's
It's
just
hard
this
to
year,
say
so it's hard
whether-
to say.
Yeah.
If we continue to see that trend, we
Want to look at it.
certainly want to look at it.
All right, so here's where I begin to break it out at the high school level to 10th and 11th. And so this is simply showing North Shore versus the state, the Smarter Balance ELA results. And so here you can better see what those
Yeah.
gaps are like across grade levels between North Shore and the state. And you can see more specifically, of course, what our exact pass rates were. So in 10th grade, for example, when all of a sudden they needed to graduate, just like with the HISP and the WASL, before the HISP, the pass rates all of a sudden skyrocket. 11th, excluding refusals was at 71%, so still almost on par with what grades 3 through 8 were doing on ELA. Once you incorporate refusals, which is how it's displayed on the OSPI report card page, is 30%, because anybody who refused was counted as if they tested.
How many
at zero.
refused out of what?
About 44%, I think it was,
44%.
of our juniors.
Close enough.
And that was statewide, correct?
Us.
Yeah.
Pretty close, yeah. Yep,
44 was North Shore.
yep. And then here's a similar chart for math. As you can see, math does progressively go down in its pass rate over time, as we were mentioning in the previous slide. And 11, excluding refusals, 58%. Once you roll in those refusals, goes down to 23%.
But those kids are still covered by the algebra and geometry EOC, correct? So they're okay to.
Yeah, and that was
they're okay to graduate.
that was the rationale that the state gave for not allowing 10th graders to take the math smarter balanced yet, was because the EOCs are being phased out at a much slower pace than with the history.
Eventually, you'll take this in the 10th, as a 10th grader.
Nope. What EOCs are being phased out across the next 3 school years, and after that, if everything goes as planned as of this moment right now, 11th grade Smarter Balance will be the only state assessments for graduation and federal accountability.
And if you don't pass, you can take it in your 12th grade year.
Yep.
Or do a course. So they're gonna phase out offering course.
Mhm.
They're gonna phase out offering it as to 10th graders?
Then, of course, exams?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, the Smarter Balance.
Yes. Mhm. Yeah, the.
Just math, right? Not ELA?
No, both.
Oh.
Why is
The 18 and 19 school year, I believe, is the first year as of right now that Smarter Balance will be it. Will be the sole state assessment.
That seems what I need to keep track of my kids the most. I mean, seriously, when they got in, all of them, when they got into high school, like,
So there seems to be a lot of, in my brain, logic to offering it to a 10th grader, giving them that option to try it. And so what is their reasoning behind removing that option?
I don't know so much about the reasoning behind removing the option. To use the 10th grade ELA last year, they had to get special permission from the feds and from the Smarter Balance consortium folks to actually use it on 10th graders. Because they had to be sure to keep that data out of the college and career ready analysis to establish what that bar would be, since it's technically designed to be a junior year test. And so, so it caused, potential ripples for a lot of folks for us to get that kind of special privilege, I suppose, to provide the ELA to our 10th graders. Now, with that said, a lot can happen in 3 years, and so, they very well could re-implement it as a 10th grade exam if they deem that students need more time to fulfill their state assessment graduation requirements, or in 3 years maybe we won't have state assessment graduation requirements. That's the other direction that needs to go. All right, so the MSP, which we know and love because it's been around for 5 years now. So I have now we have a time trend instead of just looking at what happened across grade levels. And so 5th grade North Shore scores went down to 3%, or went down 3%, to 81%, went down to 3% would be North Shore in science. And 8th grade went down a few percent as well. And both those drops were mirrored by the state, where statewide science scores went down on the MSP. Last I heard from most guys that they're exploring why that occurred, with the major culprit being that it was just a more rigorous test that particular school year. You have to transition out certain items every year, bring in different items every year, and so it could be that the new items that came in just happened to not be a good match. But so we'll see if they actually come out with any results of the analysis they're doing.
So in the other standardized testing world, SAT, et cetera, they norm so that if it's a harder test,
Mhm.
you're not penalized because the kids who took the test before you aren't benefiting from the fact that they had an easier test.
Mhm.
Why aren't we doing that? Why aren't we?
Well, OSPI does do equating every year to make sure that each form of the test from year to year is equal in rigor. You know, like, as you probably know with the items, they rank them, basically 1 through 5 often as, easy to hard. And so part of that process of bringing in new items is if you take out item that's level 3 of being hard, you bring in another level 3 item. And so theoretically, it should match up pretty well. And so there are a lot of folks out there wondering if there was something else at play. Maybe, for example, the ELA and the Math Smarter Balance test took longer to administer than what a lot of people were used to with the MSP, and a lot of schools chose to test science last since it has the least amount of impact on accountability and stuff. And so maybe there's a level of burnout with students.
They're also trying to take items that more align with next generation science standards, so there was some shift in exactly what types of items they were pulling to try and, because as instruction is starting to shift toward that, but we don't really have an assessment that assesses that specifically, this is an intermediary step. So that could have had some effect on it.
That's a good point. All right, so this is a breakout by level, because of course just looking at the percent who met standard doesn't tell the whole story. It's often helpful to look at out of those who met standard, what are the proportions who are getting a level 3 versus a level 4. So this is math, and again, we don't have across time yet, so we just have grade levels. We got access here. And just 11th grade again, because 10th graders did not take the Math Smarter Balanced exam. And so, as you can see, with the exception of grade 5, the rate of level 4s was fairly equivalent across the grade levels. Again, with just 1 year data, can't really say a whole lot about why that occurred. What typically we'll see happen here when we have one group that did exceptionally well compared to the rest is that it's a cohort effect. And so maybe next year we'll see this bump in L4s in grade 6, and in 2 years from now, grade 7, so on and so forth. And here is for ELA, so now we have our 10th grade bar in here as well. You can see here there's much more variability on ELA, the students who achieved a level 4 versus a level 3. Third graders, nearly half of all students who tested got a level 4. That is, of course, the group that people were most concerned about since they had little to no experience on computerized testing, which further proves the theory that it's just the adults who worry about computerized
Well,
testing.
I don't know if this is the same way with all the grades, but I think potentially one of the variables could be is it wasn't timed.
Correct, and can be tested across
You could
multiple
take
days.
as long, my understanding is, you could take as long as you needed to take. Now, is that the same way for all the other grades?
Yes. You could
Okay.
you could practically take as long as you needed to. For the adaptive testing, for example, the time restraint, which really wasn't a restraint at all, was 45 days, which was practically the entirety of the allowable window. For performance testing, I believe it was 10 days from the date it was first initiated, which again was likely more than enough time for practically anyone to get through that portion of the test. And that's true for every single grade level. And so as you can see, as we get to the middle school years, 6, 7, and 8, that's where we see the biggest reduction in students achieving a level 4, even though the percent meeting standard was pretty consistent across all those grades.
It's a low number of level 1s in 10th grade.
Yeah.
Across the district, 3.
But if you're a 1 or a 2, you don't meet standard, correct?
Yep. All right, here's a slide on the end of course exam results for algebra and biology. This is the last time that I'll be able to displayed the algebra and of course exam results because it's being phased out. So last year, only 9th through 12th graders could take it, even if you're a 7th or an 8th grader who was in algebra. This year, only 10th through 12th graders can take it, which means it's essentially just a retake now, because probably upwards of 95% or higher of our students, I would guess, complete algebra and have passed the algebra EOC by the end of their 9th grade year. But it is available as a retake for 10th through 12th graders. The next year, 11, 12, year after that, just seniors, and then theoretically it's gone.
So there's no end of course exams for math anymore, except smart balance, essentially.
Except as a retake. Yeah. And then you'll see I don't have state results for this school year for algebra EOC for the state because they didn't report anything. Not sure why.
They didn't like
And biology EOC is still an active EOC. It's not being phased out yet because the plan is that it'll just be 100% replaced once the next generation science standards test is implemented.
And when is that? I'm sorry.
2017 probably.
Okay.
That hasn't been firmly determined.
So, but before, when the elementary kids that are in now will take it?
Likely, but that still needs processing at the state level. Right now, all the state has done is defer the biology and of course as a graduation requirement for the class of 2015 and 2016. Presumably because some point before we get to the end of 2016, some new science assessment is going to take the place of the biology and course exam, but that's, stay tuned there.
And it's not smarter balance?
Nope. That's what it is.
Just to add another layer of confusion and names to
Have a
remember.
long smart.
Exactly.
This is everybody's favorite, adequate yearly progress. So as a reminder, adequate yearly progress is the federal accountability piece to why state assessments happen. And the bar right now to meet AYP in each category is 100%, which isn't 100% true though, because they allow us to implement a 95% confidence interval on our results. And so if you get a group, especially if it's a small group, close to 100%, they're counted as meeting because that 95% confidence interval allows you to inflate what the true percentage meeting standard was. And so with that said though, as you can see, we didn't meet the proficiency goals in any area in elementary, which for AYP is banded for grades 3 through 5, even though our elementaries are 3 through 6. For AYP, since it's a federal thing and federal rules, it's 3 through 5. Met all the participation goals for elementary, which is 95% of all students in each category. And to try to make the table a little more interesting, I included the group sizes for the student groups who were included. And I included how far away we were on the proficiency goals. And so you remember we were right around upper 70s or so on the smart and balanced. And with a large group, your confidence interval is going to be very small, so it inflates it very little. And so that's why you see like negative 22, so 22 points away from 100% meeting standard for that group. So you can get an idea for how close or how far away the subgroups were.
So, but Hispanic is a large group, and they're quite a ways away.
Yep.
So that would be concerning.
Yeah.
And what is a limited English speaker? Who fits in that category? I
Yellow.
understand that's a smaller,
Yellow.
English language learners.
there's only 67.
That were included in this
In that
because
test.
the large majority of our ELL students exit by the end of their 2nd grade year, and with the state assessments not starting until 3rd grade, a lot of those students never get rolled into that count.
We don't have the yellow up, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade.
We have them, but if the kids start with us, then the exit category for ELA is, or ELL is
Sorry.
oral primarily. So if you can speak the language, you're gonna exit by and large. And by the time you've been in school, K1, 2, you can usually speak the language, so you're no longer deemed ELL, even though English is your second language. But you've
Okay.
exited, see?
Okay.
So,
And we don't have that many kids come in third, fourth, fifth grade that don't speak the language essentially, is what
Fewer.
that kind of looks like.
fewer, looks like 67.
Yeah, well, that's,
But
yeah, I just wanted to.
that's right, it's a small number, yeah.
So,
So you may recall that on the state achievement index, they've created this new category that would capture any students who are either in or exited from ELL, and we'll track them over time so that we can sort of see what the effect is on those students, even though they've technically exited the program. How are they performing relative to other students, if they were ever served by ELL?
Because academic language takes much longer to acquire in the.
correct, I have ELL students that I teach, yes.
Do you? Yeah.
Oh my goodness, it's so much longer, the academic piece. Yeah, someone might speak it perfectly fluently, you can't even tell, but
Right.
academically,
Not at all.
yeah, I get that. But yeah, so I would be concerned, again, Hispanic, looking at low income, which that might have overlap in some of these groups. But, we're teasing out the Hispanic group there, and that's pretty high in those categories. And the proficiency is passing smarter balance?
Yep.
What,
Correct.
okay.
And so that's another point too, Brandon, so it's possible a student, the same student might be Hispanic, showing up in ELL, showing up in special ed, showing up in low income.
Right, so that's why I see the low income's really high, but I was going, that could be 2 categories or more, which is still concerning, but Hispanic would, if I'm just looking at that category, right? They're probably not any of, no, there could be some other ones, but that category probably stands alone, does that make sense?
Yeah, that category certainly would stand alone, but we also know that of our Hispanic population, there is a high correlation with low income as well.
Correct, correct. That could be an influencing factor.
Yeah.
But,
Well, and if English is their second or third language, it makes sense that in the English language test, that if they're in the program, it means they've got limited English, so they're going to not be as proficient. I mean, it's
Yeah.
a
and the
conundrum.
math, yeah.
Yes.
And math, like
Exactly
that.
the word I was thinking of.
I just think it points to kind of what our board goals are and what we want to focus on in this area, like, and I know the rest of the nation wants to figure that out too.
Sure, I just want to say again that if you are limited English and if you're in ELL,
You are really limited English.
it means you won't meet English language proficiency because you're in ELL.
But still, well, now I get that that's a small N, the 67,
And
so if that's skewed, but, you definitely had, what is that telling me, Brandon, that I had half of those students, or 60% of those students did meet it out of the limited English?
After incorporating the conference intervals, so a little less than that.
Okay,
But in the,
so there were a group making it.
Yeah. Yeah, roughly half, without knowing what the conference interval was for that group. All right, so here's the similar chart for middle school, which is banded by grades 6 through 8. You can see that the participation rate for math for special education was not met. The bar is 95%, 94.7% participated, so missed it by a kid.
Yeah.
Wow.
Just about a kid.
And interestingly enough, in the Hispanic group, you've got a good number meeting the math proficiency. So it's kind of steady across the board till you get to math there, and that's an interesting number of what the factors are in that. Because that's almost the same as, or it's less than the white. Now I realize that's broader because there's more, probably, maybe the variance would be the same if you compare those two. The numbers, but they might be equal, right? 26 and 21.
Yeah, depending upon what the conference interval was that was placed on it. Yeah. And here we have high school, where if you recall, the refusal rate for
Yeah.
juniors, which is why we have nothing but a big slide of no's.
So in high,
And I forgot to change the titles up here, that should be ELA and ELA not reading.
The other indicator in high school there is graduation rate.
Yep, so that one, yes. All
that
right.
means 95% of all students graduate?
No, the graduation rate bar is different, and it goes up a little bit every year.
It's mid-80s.
Yeah, for some reason 88% was in my brain. It's slowly creeping up to 90 over time. So that'll also be one of those bars if AOIP stays with us, that'll be harder and harder for folks to achieve. All right, so that all leads into performance measure 1.8, increase the percentage of students proficient on all state assessments required for graduation. So it's going to be focusing obviously on just the high school state assessments. So state assessments required for class of 2015 were reading, writing, and math, because at some point in June, the legislature took away the biology requirement for last year's seniors and this year's seniors. I should say.
It was actually in July.
It wasn't
After
July.
graduation.
Yeah.
Wow, that was later than I even thought.
You just knew it was gonna.
Right after.
I knew it started with a J. And so
January.
reading and writing now can also be met via the Smarter Balanced ELA, which takes care of both those reading and writing requirements because it incorporates both reading and writing among other things as well. All right, so this is just a look over the past 4 cohorts, or I should say the last 3 in our current cohort. And so you can see that it's been fairly stable over time, the percentage of students getting the CAA, which is the Certificate of Academic Achievement, meaning they met all the state assessment graduation requirements without using any of the Certificate of Individual Achievement opportunities, which are available to students enrolled in special education. That's the light blue bar up here. And then that kind of, was that lime greenish color, is the diploma, which is students who graduated but did not get a certificate because they used out-of-state test scores, which is a waiver of our state assessment requirements, not meeting the state assessment requirements, and so they don't get a CAA or CIA, but they still graduate for meeting the requirements from a different state.
And Brandon, is that only eligible to students who come from out of state in their junior or senior years, or just their senior years?
It's at least junior and senior, and I'll need to review. End of course exams have become more and more popular across the United States, and just like us, lots of kids are meeting those requirements in the 8th grade and 9th grade. And so 10th graders may even be able to use them if they took an end of course exam in the 8th or 9th grade from out of state, but I'll need to double check that to make sure that's still true. But it's certainly true that if they come to us as a junior or senior, that they can use out-of-state results.
Doesn't the class of 2015 have a larger number of tests that they had to graduate than the previous?
No, that was originally the case with the science requirement.
So
But
the other 2 classes had 4?
no, all 3 of these had 3, reading, writing, and math.
And one of the math, you didn't have
One,
to do
you didn't have to bring in
Right.
math. 2015 you did both math.
No, and initially students were taking both math because that was the initial
They changed
requirement.
They did it after they took the test?
Yeah.
One step forward.
Yeah, you know.
And then then this is just kind of a preview of how our current seniors look. And as you can see, with the current cohort, which is changing every day though, as students come in, students move out, students drop out, so on and so forth. It's looking like they're primed to finally get up to that 90% rate for the CAA, especially now that they don't have the science requirement either for that grad cohort. This is a look of by gender. This is now, these slides broken out by the achievement gaps are just looking at class of 2015, so last year's graduates. As you can see, females 90% earning the CAA, an additional 3.8% receiving the CIA. While males were lower on the CAA, they made up for it with a higher percentage receiving the CIA.
But at the end of the day, the numbers are about the same.
Yeah. And this is special education. Want to point out, you may see that for non-special ed, and by the way, the parentheses are group sizes. You'll see non-special ed, 0.1% of students earn a CIA. The reason why that can happen is that a student took a CIA option when they were in SPED, but by the time they graduated, were not in special education anymore. You know, the state doesn't strip away the CIA if they exit special education. So that's why that popped up for the first time since I've been doing this analysis.
Who is that kid?
Because at first when I saw that, I was like, uh-oh, now I got to do it all over again. Then I realized, oh, he exited. English language learners. As you can see the fairly large disparity there.
Okay, so that's not Hispanic, that's anybody who, English language, is there second language in this
And
category?
they're still in the program.
Still in
Yeah.
the program,
They
that's
have-
deep.
Anybody who is in the ELL
Program.
program, officially enrolled in the program, meaning, so the ELL, students who are in the ELL program take an additional exam annually, and if they don't pass that exam, they automatically stay in
So
ELL.
these students cannot speak English fluently in this group?
And they more than likely came to us late in their academic career
Yeah.
as non-English. So they at least probably didn't start with us in kindergarten because those students generally exit in a couple of years. These students probably came to us perhaps in junior high or high school as non-English speakers.
Right, okay.
And free and reduced lunch. Is that backwards?
Yeah, it is.
Wait, okay, so
I'll
I'm
take a
trying to
check at that one, I have a bad feeling about
think
that.
I don't understand the non-free reduced side, I guess.
I think they're flipped.
We think it's backwards.
Yeah,
I think we have a labeling problem.
that's probably,
It's still good
It's
news
still
for
pretty.
free and reduced. I mean,
Yeah.
even the reverse is,
why is that good news?
Because percentage still.
well, it's, I was gonna say 80% is not a,
Oh, it's 80 when
Certainly
you
for
count,
the 20%.
I'm sorry, it's 80% when you count all the different ways
Yeah.
that you can, I see what you're saying. I was looking at 70.
88%.
It makes more sense what you're saying now.
we don't care about 30%.
Yeah.
Real-
There's always, I always like to throw in a surprise in every presentation.
We're paying attention.
Yep. Just got, have to make sure, you know. All right, so here's by ethnicity. Let me make sure that my labels look correct, and yes, I believe so. So-
Wait.
Oh, yep.
Sorry. That's what I wanted to see, yeah. Do you mind next year putting like the total percentage above it?
Oh,
Do you understand, like, well, I'm trying to, analyze it in quicker. Okay.
Let's do about 80.
But the lowest category of, I think everything we've looked at except for special. No.
REL.
Interesting that, well, I guess never mind. I was gonna say between white and Asian, but they're actually the same because you know how Asian students typically outperform white students. Okay, never mind.
I'm wondering out loud, on our African American, how many, and it's a small number, but how many of us that didn't make it our for incoming students from Somalia and Sudan. They're also in our ELL category.
Do you track that?
Probably not
We-
at Brandon's level, I'm
you can-
sure we
you
do
can
it at the school.
disaggregate
but-
it.
Yeah,
We
well,
can
it's
just
not an
segregate it
aggregated
further.
number.
No, we have to drill down.
Go into the yellow program.
And with
Which
only
kids, which school?
36, that would be very likely.
Right.
Well, is there any way to disaggregate the data a little bit more to see which students are in the 2 or more categories, of which students are free reduced lunch and Hispanic, but we can't look at data that way? Or any other, you know what I'm saying, like,
Oh, yeah, we can, and I can't remember for what, but we've done some analyses of that before, looking at students who are, for example, Hispanic and in ELL and free reduced lunch. To kind of
Special ed.
see, yeah, and, you know, kind of see what's possibly
other factors?
unique to that group of students, and just to see how often students are impacting the AYP, you know, cell after cell after cell.
And I feel like we make a lot of assumptions, which are probably maybe true, but do we really know that that's the case? Like,
I mean, really, you can slice and dice the data 1,000 ways. It's a matter of, you know, what ways are the most useful to view it. But yeah, so we can.
I just feel like that it's, now for 2 years, I think I'm asking I didn't know last year maybe, but now I'm asking some of these same questions that may be helpful if the data was disaggregated. You know, because it's hard to hone down on, well, what is going on if we're not able to see, okay, so poverty, what lines is poverty crossing?
Yeah.
Or free reduced lunch crossing, and what,
Sometimes-
I feel like we kind of talk in hypotheticals.
I think we've done that in the past at the school level at times, I recall, taking, when you look at the cells that add AYP to say, oh, look at, name a school, here's the Hispanic and of these X, then they're, free and reduced, the X amounts in special ed, so we know that they've kind of crossed a bunch of different other cells. So we could do
Maybe
that.
there'd be something that would surprise us too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We don't know.
Yeah. All right, so moving forward, for 12th graders as the last cohort that will use the HISP for graduation requirements. So again, theoretically, the last administration will be this March, but we'll see if they may be bringing in for a final retake or something next school year. They can always do that if they wish, since that's a state assessment, not used for federal accountability. Math EOC is going to be phased out over the next 3 school years. Science assessment is not required for class of 2016. And speaking of ELL students, the ELPA 21 is the annual assessment that they will begin taking winter of this school year. And so that is also a primarily online test, similar in fashion to Smarter Balanced, which has to be aligned around Common Core, academic language, and will be mostly computerized,
So is that the,
which means kindergarten students taking a computerized online test if 3rd grade wasn't scary enough.
But they have some paper pencil.
Yeah,
And lens.
so wellness alpha is similar to NSD.
Yep,
Smart balance.
yep, so it'll be replacing the WELPA.
So is Alpha national?
Yeah, kind of, it's, I think last I heard there's 8 states, so not nearly as broad as Smarter Balanced.
But it's not just.
Yeah, not just Washington.
We had to buy some new headphones too with the little speaker things, because they have to
Oh, really?
speak into the computer and then.
Is there voice
that was-
recognition with the computer, or is it recorded?
1, 2, 3.
Yeah, so that'll be an
That is
interesting little
interesting.
tidbit for us.
I hope that works.
Me too.
Thank you, Brenda.
So I'll see you in 2 weeks for the next study session. Oh, I own it, sorry.
Reading. team, Lisa,
Yeah.
can answer some questions. I'm just imagining what you're talking about. It's good. Yeah.
Thank you, Sandy, for writing the.
Yep.